neither on this mountain nor in the temple of Jerusalem. And I thought, well, where is it then? Where is this new place of worship?
When you focus on God the way I'm talking about, by focusing on the God who lives in your heart, the attention, the focus, it can't miss because you're looking in the right place. Because you stop and wait on the Lord's leading. There's a time during worship like this that you're not quite sure what's going to happen because you're waiting to see what God's going to do. I did begin to experience something I had experienced a few times before, where God becomes very apparent in the room. I'd experienced that a few times before, where God was an awesome presence and everyone was simply listening and experiencing Him. We did sing soft songs. We did sing songs that, well, that's a nice thing too, is a song where you sing the words slowly. It gives you a chance to God sort of speak between the spaces. And that was happening here. I was becoming aware of that, where it says, where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. In the midst of them is in the space between the people. And everything intensified, and it intensified for me personally and for everyone in the building. I believe we were all singing with a good heart towards God. One of the main reasons I wanted to do this for the first time in a congregation, I knew that there was something special about doing it with other people. It helped that other people were there. Other people were exalting the Lord and paying attention to God. And it finally got to a point, because I wouldn't look away. Eventually, it got to the point I simply saw Him. To a point where I just couldn't deny that He was there. I began to see Him because He was there. It was real enough to see. Until I finally couldn't deny it any longer. He was there. I was looking right at Him. I knew I was looking right at Him. And when I knew I was looking right at Him and I looked again, I saw Him. I saw Him here in the place where He's always lived. And nothing had ever changed. He'd always been right there. And I always knew God was in me, but I didn't know that was Him. I thought He was just my conscience, my own conscience, telling me the truth, telling me what's right, telling me what's good, like the standard. All the time it had been God there in me, His very presence showing me right, showing me what's good. Yeah, I believe He had been there my whole life, and I just didn't know it was Him. I mean, I might have known when I was a little child, but as I grew up, I lost touch and lost track. Just thought it was my conscience, because that's what the world taught me. That's what school taught me. That's what they teach you. They don't teach you God can be real. They explain Him away with stuff like that. Of course, I was overwhelmed when I knew it was God, and I was overwhelmed. But God, He looked back at me like, well, I'm glad you finally understand who I am and see me for who I am. I've been here all along. It's just like I've been waiting. That's the way it looked to me when I was looking into Him. And He didn't seem all that overjoyed. He just seemed like, yeah, this is me. But boy, you connect with Him. See, I'd learned how to connect with Him. And it was powerful. And I could always connect with Him from then on. That's what made it so powerful. Is, I'm looking at Him that night, and I'm saying to Him, okay, what now, God? Now that I'm in your presence, and now that we've met like this, what do you want me to do? Well, what now? What are we doing now? And He just looked at me as if to say, this is enough. You've done what you should. You've submitted yourself to me. You've come to me. You've focused on me. And now you know where I am in you. Now you know me in you.
So now, from now on, will just continue from here. And what I found out, this evangelist, she took a long time to come out. So I had a whole lot of time to worship God with the rest of the congregation while she was waiting to come out. And maybe she was led by God to wait, because when she came out, when she did speak, what she said was, there's a presence in this building I don't know what to do with. So almost as if maybe she was delaying in the back room coming out because of that.
And there's a lesson in what happened after we had this wonderful experience with God. See, my question is, well, not even a question, right? My observation is about what should happen, as a result of an encounter like this. Talking about with a whole congregation. I was feeling this that night. I was experiencing this. And I probably wasn't the only one in the building when the evangelist came up and began to speak. Well, she couldn't say anything for a little bit. She stood there and she began to minister just a couple words. Nothing specific, but what I could tell she was doing is she could not interrupt what was going on. She couldn't. She would begin to say something and she realized God is still doing something. She finally said, there is a presence in this building even I don't know what to do with. But nevertheless, I must go on with the mandate of God. And turns out that was taking up an offering. She interrupted what God was doing to take up an offering. So what should happen in that meeting? What should happen in that case? Where God is manifest to you and to the people around you, and God is doing something. Or we should let it continue. As long as God wants to do something. And as long as you are open to Him, He wants to do something. What does it mean to you and me? To let that something keep on happening in our personal lives, even if they're not going to let it happen in the church. Because where's the true place of worship? Where's the real authority? It's God. God is the real authority, and He lives in our hearts. So obey the true authority. Be faithful to God in spite of what anybody says or does. Don't let the religious leaders of the day talk you out of it the way they tried to talk Jesus out of it. You're in good company. Let this commitment be the one you make. To listen to what He says. To follow Him as God above anybody else. Above what anybody says to you. Let Him be God. Follow Him like that, and He will be God to you. Not just God in name, but God in action in your life. And that's a good life. What would I have said if she'd asked me? Or more like this. She says, there's a presence in this building even I don't know what to do with. She'd say, you have a word for us? People in the church leaders, they wouldn't want me to get up there at all, of course. But she'd have to tell them because she feels God telling her to let me speak. It'd be the only way that could happen in that situation. Because they came to see her. They spent a lot of money and put a lot of time and invested to get her there. They didn't want to hear from me. They didn't even know me. What I imagine is her thinking about that moment and saying to herself, I don't know what to do with this. There's something so powerful in the atmosphere that God is doing here that I don't even know what it is. I don't know. Can't put my finger on it. I don't know what to say about it. I don't even know how to lead this meeting any further. Do you have a word from God? I feel you have a word from God. Now, I know none of y'all came to see me today. So I'm not trying to speak some word from God that's going to just blow you away, and I'm not trying to take over this meeting. What I want to say to you today, I would be speaking to the evangelist. As I've been hearing you speak about this place that you enter into to meet God, this secret and holy place. I've been hearing you speak about this holy place that we enter, and I connected with it at first. But God has shown me that holy place that you're talking about is not some special place that God ushers you into, but it's the place that God lives in your own heart. And the only difference between when you meet God like that and when you don't is because in those times when you see God and experience God and connect with God, at those times, it's when you're very clear. It's when the cobwebs have been taken away. It's when your connection with God is more certain because you're your true self in your heart. The pure in heart shall see God. And when all the cobwebs are taken away and the darkness has been expelled, your heart is pure and you see God. I came to this meeting tonight looking to have this encounter with God. I've had it. I'm here to tell you. It's not being perfect. It's not you being pure in a sense. No, it's you having nothing to hide. It's your heart being clean because you are completely yourself. You hide nothing, you pretend nothing. You're completely open to God. That's what allows you to see Him clearly and for Him to be clear to you, because then He's meeting the real you and the real you is meeting Him. And the thing that keeps you out of His presence It's not that he needs to usher you into another place, but that you're not even true to your own heart. But don't be dismayed. God can clarify you. God can reconcile you. And he's already reconciled you in his Spirit through his Son. But you, like the Apostle Paul said, be reconciled to God, even though God has reconciled you through his Son. Now be reconciled to him fully, mind, soul, body. Be clarified, be purified through interaction with God. Because as you turn to look to God, his light purifies you. And as you look into his face, you are changed from that old glory of trying to please God by doing everything right, which is the law, to the new glory of being righteous through what Jesus has done and resting entirely on that and not on your own works, which will never justify you, but righteous through his Spirit and through the reconciliation that his Spirit does inside you, because he came to talk to us, to stay in us, to complete the picture that he's been trying to place in our hearts for so long. The picture of God. The picture of the firstborn among many brethren. We are the brethren. Jesus is the first. We're all predestined to be conformed to the image of the Son. He's the firstborn. And we're the brethren. He's placed that image in our hearts in the face of Jesus Christ. And we'll change when we stay in him, when we look into him, and when we're transformed by contact with him in his Spirit. When we look and believe and the rivers of living water flow from our heart out to fill the entirety of us and to fill our minds and to transform our thoughts into thoughts that match his by winning those thoughts over to himself as friends. This is God. He's God. He's manifested. The thing that you do with it is nothing. You listen. You stand back. You let him lead. When he's ready for you to speak, he'll let you know. That's what you do with it. And what we do with it is the same. We stand back, we let him lead. If he leads us to speak, that's his will. But let every one of us be submitted to his leading and not be out of order, but to be inspired to say the thing that he tells us to say, or to say nothing at all, but to listen. Because God will speak to each of us individually without any of us saying a word. At least spend some time letting him do that as much as he wants. And when you see people crying in the aisles because God is touching them, and when you see people shout hallelujah because God is touching them, don't do anything but affirm what you are seeing your Father do. God prevalent. Went to bed, God prevalent in my heart. Woke up the next morning. Pop up. Awareness of God, and oh yes, flood back all the memories of last night. But more than that, just the connection with God right away. Went to work. Had an experience at work where I began to do a task and focus on that task. And I realized that I sort of pushed God out of my consciousness for a moment to do a task. And I realized, oh, that's not right. That's almost like I'm coming out of him in a sense. And I was in a sense, but although technically you're not outside of him when this happens, what you're doing is you're hiding your face from him. It wasn't anything huge. It was something kind of trivial that I was doing. But the point was, is I realized, oh, God, I get a work attitude. I remember just stopping in my tracks and just turning to God inside and saying, oh, God, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't realize that I'd do that. I get a work attitude. That's what I said to God. And God, it was like, he was so gracious the way he's like, oh, it's okay. It's all right, son. You know, it's fine. Just instantly washed any possible guilt that would have been attached to that away. And I realized, oh, he's been there all this time, going through these things with me, these moments where I get focused on something else. And it hasn't been bothering him, or he really appreciated, that is, when I recognized it and realized, hey, I don't have to push him out of my conscience to do a task. I can keep my heart open to him while I'm focusing on what I'm doing. It's just a matter of just not, gritting my teeth and like pushing him out. And that was a great lesson for me from then on. But also right at that moment, it meant that I could stay in him during the rest of the day. I'd be focused on him. And I was. And I told people at work about it. Telling people about the experience was one of the best things I could do at the time. I just kept talking about it. God was remaining strong in me as I would do it always. As I would talk about him when I wouldn't talk about him. I didn't have to prove anything to him. I didn't have to do anything for him. I could just be in him. I didn't have to say a word. And he was still just as strong, just as connected with me. It was because, if for no other reason, it was because I was able to look to him in my heart where I knew him to be. Because I'd experienced it, because I'd seen him there. I could look to him and stay in him.
And what I found out was from then on, I was able to continue to connect with him. Anytime I could connect with him, because I knew how to connect with him. Which means I could stay in him. And I knew when I wasn't staying in him. I knew when I was hiding my face from him. I knew when I wasn't paying attention, when I was pushing him out of my conscience to do something that I didn't want God around knowing that I was doing. Isn't that foolish, of course? But I could tell when I did that. I could tell when I wasn't paying attention to him. I could tell when I was not keeping my heart open to him. And because of that, I learned how to keep my heart open to him all the time. I could stay in him by leaving my heart open even while I was engaged in other things of the day. Even while my mind might be thinking on the thoughts of what I'm doing. Yet I could keep my heart open and not come out of him, not have to ignore him in order to do what I had to do during my day. And it settled me down. It made me able to just trust him. It doesn't have to be complicated. I could just be in him. He and me.
Jesus, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, Peter, but my Father in heaven has revealed this to you.
Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you either, but your Father in heaven has revealed this to you. You believe because Jesus revealed it to you. You believe because the Father has taught you himself.
Would you like God to show you the same thing about yourself that you already know about his Son? That his strength and his power is there working through you. That's the kind of building up that builds up the church.
This is one of those times when God prompted me to ask him a question. If they had stayed up to pray with Jesus just like he said, would that have meant that Peter would not have denied him 3 times when the cock crew? What would you have told Peter that would have protected him and kept him from falling to temptation? Seems like always there's a little pause right before just to make sure that you're listening. I would have told him the same thing about himself that he already knew about my son.